Oral questions. Question orale.
Mr. Speaker, on March 12th in this chamber, I asked the government how many ventilators they had procured to prepare for the wave of COVID-19 cases that were coming. In response, the Deputy Prime Minister said, quote, "We are already leading a bulk national procurement effort to ensure Canadians have the necessary medical equipment." A month later, I asked how many new ventilators the government had obtained under this strategy. The Prime Minister answered, quote, "It will still be a few weeks before they arrive." Today is April 20th. So again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask how many new ventilators has the government been able to obtain under the national procurement strategy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've sent 400 ventilators to provinces and territories and have contracts with 3 Canadian companies who will supply 30,000 ventilators starting in May.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Continue to raise serious concerns about the accuracy of information coming out of China. The advice and direction from the WHO depends on the honesty and transparency of its member countries. This government has ignored Canadian experts who are calling for swift and decisive action much sooner. The government chose to continue air travel between China and Canada and waited weeks to impose travel restrictions. Yet the Prime Minister and his Health Minister continued to vouch for the government of China. Going forward, will this government continue to trust information coming from the Communist government of China?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, we followed the best public health advice. We engaged early to keep Canadians safe and prevent the spread of the virus. On January 2nd, the Public Health Agency of Canada alerted all provincial health authorities. On January 14th, Dr. Theresa Tam and the Public Health Agency of Canada convened a meeting of the Canadian Council of Medical Officers of Health. We convened the Incident Response Group in January. We enhanced airport screening measures in January and increased as the situation evolved. We will continue to respond to the situation as it evolves, and we will continue to base our decisions on the best available facts and evidence.
Well, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, there are reports that 3 Canadian planes that left China to pick up medical equipment from China returned to Canada empty. The planes were supposed to return last night. Can the government confirm whether or not those planes, in fact, were scheduled, whether or not they arrived, and whether or not they were able to obtain the medical equipment that they were sent to obtain?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the past weeks, we've been engaged in unprecedented efforts, collaborating with partners and friends around the world to ensure that we can get the PPE and medical equipment so necessary for Canadians on the front lines in hospitals and across the country. That is what we continue to do. We have teams on the ground in China and elsewhere to coordinate the arrival of the departure and arrival of shipments. We have had challenges with those shipments as the global competition for these items are fierce. We will continue to work as best we can to ensure that we continue to deliver all the necessary equipment to our heroes working on the front lines.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to that equipment, after the 2015 election, this government decided to cut funding for pandemic preparedness. In 2014, the funding for those health security measures was $73 million. The funding for this year is just $51 million. The government also decided to dump millions of masks and gloves, and they decided to close the warehouses that were holding this extra equipment in case of a pandemic. It was only because the owner of a dumpster company who put in a bid for the contract to dispose of these items that we even have these details. So, simple question for the Prime Minister: when did he sign off on the plan to throw away personal protective equipment?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we were very troubled by the story about the reports of valuable medical supplies in our national stockpile being destroyed. As we looked into it, we discovered that those items had actually been expired for 5 years. And, of course, after 5 years are not suitable for use anywhere else. That is why we have to ask ourselves questions about how items that approach the end of their lives could, instead of being kept in stockpiles, instead be shipped for immediate use in places that could use them and get those items replaced. Obviously, that didn't happen, and we need to make sure that we have better protocols going forward so we don't find ourselves in a situation like this.